Right, here we go.
Thank you everyone for coming from all around the world to our Outsystems user group tonight. And let's start with Mastering ODC, User Management and Architecture for Scalable Solutions with Stuart Harris and Jorge Martins.
All right. Thank you very much, Patricia. So let's see. Oh yeah, the toilets are over there. I suppose before we get started, if there's anyone who has anything that they would like to share and talk about, maybe in an upcoming session, please get in contact. We'd love to hear from you. So, when I started working on ODC, at that time, there wasn't you weren't able to manage users on ODC. There was the functionality there was limited, and over the past year, I've done a little bit of a POC for the new organisation I'm working for, and found that there is it's more capable now, but it works a little bit differently. So I'd like to share that journey with you. I'm Stuart Harris. I'm an Outsystems champion, development manager, and I've been working on Outsystems for 7 years. And I still remember C++. Right, so first off, we'll talk about why do we even want to build user management in an application? You know, it's in the back end in the portal. Outsystems 11 versus ODC. We'll talk about what system actions are available for user management by default. Then we'll talk about the secret sauce, which is client APIs, and then how to use those to manage users. There's a Forge component that will help. And I'll do a bit of a demo. Now, my ODC environment isn't actually available at the moment, but I'll be showing you through an application in ODC Studio without being connected, and just walk through the code. So, the reason we want to build user management in our applications is often what has tended to happen is that in a large organization, the IT organization will give access to the Outsystems platform, particularly if you're using single sign-on. But the IT team don't really understand what permissions users should really be able to have. And so then it's the business users who will better placed to assign access to different people, and can also be more responsive often. But why don't we just get them to use the backend portal? Well, the reason for that is that these are business users. They shouldn't have access to the whole portal and to be able to have permissions to manage every application. They just might be managing users for the application they're working in. So there might be other scenarios where you want to do this as well, but that's the ones that I'm experienced with. So Outsystems 11. So in Outsystems 11, as you probably well know, user management is quite flexible. You can log in on the server side. So you can actually implement your own identity server, call login, and then you've got a session, and it works. You can edit users. You can edit any user in the platform. So that means that within your application, there's nothing stopping you from editing users that are meant to be using another application. So it's very flexible, but you have to make sure that you're not actually doing the wrong thing. In ODC, in some ways it is more restrictive, but this is the path to greatness, really. This is the path to being able to integrate with all sorts of identity providers and do it in a safe and secure way. So there's an identity server in the portal, but it's not an Outsystems application itself. Not that I'm aware of it. Maybe it is in the background, but we don't have access to it like we do in Outsystems 11. OpenID Connect is the supported protocol. However, other protocols are coming. I understand there's a Forge component being prepared by the Outsystems team. So if you do need other protocols in ODC, speak to your account manager and they'll put you onto the solution architecture team and help you out. I understand it has been done for some people. We still have organization users and end users, except in ODC, they're managed by the same identity server. So the same user who can log into the backend can also, with the same credentials, log into an application. And they can log into an application in, we can say they've got access to dev or test or production or all, or just one. Now, there's a restriction here that there's one user per email address. So you can't have the same email address for multiple users. We can also add and use external identity providers at the moment, as long as they support OIDC. And the user's entity in our applications, we can't access all of the users on the platform from within an application. We can access some of the users. We can't edit them via the entity. So there are some basic system actions. So in terms of editing the user, you can use this update user profile call. You can start a reset password, but it's restricted in a good way via these actions. You can also see there's no login action on the server side. There's a login action on the client side. So we can't just implement an identity server ourselves and then just call login on the server side and then you have a session. So it's constrained a bit more. So here is the secret sauce. The magic is ODC has introduced this concept of client APIs. At the moment, we have a user management API and a portfolio management API. I believe there will be others coming along as time goes on. They're also rate limited, and that's what we're going to use to manage users. So the user management API, we can manage users. We can manage users in bulk as well, manage roles, groups. And what we do is we get an access key from the system using a client credentials grant, and then we use that access key to call APIs. So how does that work? Well, the basic flow is we actually have to configure that API client in the portal. So an admin does that, and they get a client ID and client secret, which are OAuth, part of the OAuth protocol. Share them with the developer, and the developer configures them in the application. Hopefully, they're using secret settings so that they're configured in the portal, but we're not talking about that exactly. So then once they're in the app, we request an access token, and then we can call APIs. So that's basically how that works. Let's go into more detail again. So when we're creating a client API, it kind of looks like this. We can specify for this one that we're creating, we can specify whether it's just available in dev or just test or prod. And to be clear, this is, it's not creating a new API as such, it's creating access to the APIs that are there. And you can select what sort of permissions you want, just to view members, to manage access, or to manage users and edit them in total. Okay, so now the expiration for the keys defaults to 90 days. And you can tell the system to send you a reminder before they expire. Once you've selected all that, then you just create the API client. Then that's going to present you with the client ID and the client secret. Now, this is your one chance to get that client secret. If you don't get it, you'll have to generate a new secret, and then you'll have one chance to get it when you regenerate it. So be smart, copy them, put them in a password manager. This is the Forge component that we can use to help us. So this wraps a whole lot of that logic for us. It's the user management connector, ODC. Now, a few months ago, there was a bit of a compatibility issue with some libraries. If you've seen this and tried it and had a problem with installing it, that's all been resolved a couple of months ago. So that's why it's version 1.01. Okay, now this is the unintuitive bit, but it's very important. So to get to that, to get an access token, there's not a fixed URL in your environment that you can get it from. What you need to do is call this well-known OpenID configuration URL, and that'll give you API endpoints for different services. And the one that we want is the token endpoint. So you can then use that. You can configure that as a REST API and get your access token from there. And to get that token, you send a HTTP post. The format is a form encoded body. You use a client credentials grant. You pass in your client ID and secret. You can see in the request the part of it that I've copied on here. That's the format of it, form encoded. And this is the response you get. So one of the things is the access token that you need and a bit of extra information. So when we have that token, we use it to call the API. In the authorization header, it's a bearer token. So you put bearer space and then the token. And then we can call our APIs. So let's have a quick look at how that works. Where are we? Over here. Okay, first off, this OpenID configuration, if I open that, this is what it looks like. There we go. And so we grab that token endpoint, and then we configure this get token call here with that endpoint. So that's a really nice feature. So someone hacking into the system can't just automatically go, oh, I'm just going to go to the OpenID connect/token and see if I can, hack into it. It's going to make it a lot harder for them. So then we get our token, and then we can call the API. Now, I've installed that Forge component, and I've also just implemented these calls here. Let's have a look at calling that. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just sorry to interrupt. Looks like we are only seeing your Microsoft Edge page. We are not able to see what you are sharing. I'm not sure if it's just me or others.
Oh, thank you very much. All right. Looks like I'm sharing the.
If you
I'll
could
share again.
How you got the domain?
Thanks very much. Oh, I shared a window instead of my entire screen. Same as usual. Right. How's that? Can you see Outsystems now?
Yes, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, so let's have a look at that again. So this is the that well-known OpenID configuration. And this is the response. So in the headers, hang on for a sec, where are we? All right. So here's that token endpoint. So we can see that that's looks like a big GUID. And then we implement our get token requests. So that's the URL there that I took from that OpenID configuration. Form URL encoded. And there it is. And returns an access token. And it's expired, so if you try and use that one, you know it's expired, so bad luck. All right, so let's have a look at, this is a user's page that lists users based on retrieving them from that API. So let's dive into it a little bit, shall we? Get users. Now we're calling our get token API here, and passing. Now the grant type on here is I didn't specify because it's defaulting to client credentials, our client ID, and our client secret. Now I probably should put encode URL around that one as well. Just be aware of that. When I was doing this and I didn't encode it, then it wasn't working. So, right, then we get our token. Now I've got this get base URL action, which is all that's really doing is it's just returning the URL of the application, or the base URL of the application deployed in the environment, really. You could get that from the request, but the reason I'm doing it like this is, what if you're running this as a background task? You won't have a request with that domain on it. So now we call this user's query, which is from this user management connector. So it has a lot of options here. And you need to pass the base URL to all of the actions on this user management connector. And here's the authorization header. So we're passing in the token. Now I've just created a little action here that will add bearer space onto the front of it, because, you know, I'm lazy, so I like to refactor things. And that's all it does. Bearer plus token. And that's it. So we can use that to, that was getting users, but we can use it to do any of these things, update users, delete them, create them. That's our API. That's how to use it. So let's go back to that's how we access all the users. I think next up is Jorge with architecture design for ODC.
Okay,
Over to you.
let me just share my screen. Of course, I struggle. Here we go. Window here. Okay, so I have plenty of slides and I have no demos. Apologies. You know how this works. Okay, so let me just make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing. Perfect. Okay, so I'm George, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to design your applications architecture in ODC. I'll assume that most of you will have some experience with architecture design in Outsystems 11. It's not that there's too much to talk about in that sense, but there are some similarities, so I might do some parallels as we go along. And it all starts right away as the architecture design process for ODC has exactly the same major steps as it has for Outsystems 11, except what we do inside might be a bit different. So the first step would be the disclose step. This is where, as we start analyzing our requirements, we try to identify all the business concepts along with any non-functional requirements. This is very similar to what we do in the disclose step for Outsystems 11. The next step would be organize. Again, the step names are the same, but what we do inside this is very different. Okay, so here in ODC, we are not working with modules and applications, etc. So there's a bit of a different organization of our code. So what we are going to be doing here is a bit more abstract than in Outsystems 11. We will group the concepts that we identified in what we call bounded contexts. So somehow related concepts. This is still very abstract. This is still not mapped into anything concrete in ODC. This is just to kind of reduce the granularity of all the concepts that we have, that we are manipulating. So we'll take a look at the criteria that we are going to use to group these concepts into bounded contexts in a few slides. The last step, assemble step. This is where we end up with our applications. So this is where we are going to map the bounded context that we identified into our ODC applications and libraries. And again, there's going to be best practices or guidelines in how to do this. The goal is always to privilege clear ownership, independent development lifecycle between the development teams. And here we don't have to say, oh, one bounded context, one application, and that's it. We can say this application has 10 bounded contexts because it makes sense according to the guidelines. We'll go through each of these steps in the next steps, and I'm going to even give you a few examples. I don't have a demo, unfortunately, but I will give you some examples of what would be the outcome of this process. So we start with disclose, and in the disclose step, we are here to identify concepts. Okay, this is the first step is very similar to architecture design process for Outsystems 11, and focuses on identifying concepts. So we look at the business requirements, we look at processes and user stories, we keep an eye out for persona and the roles involved in these, and these are the primary source for business concepts. So we do requirements gathering and analysis. We look at the information architecture as well because it's also a useful or a helpful source for business concepts that we may have overlooked before. So going through the requirements and the information architecture, so what our users are expecting to be able to see, manipulate, and interact with, gives us most of the application concepts. Of course, our solutions in Outsystems are rarely isolated, so we will need to understand what are the needs, the integration needs, what are the non-functional requirements that we may have, as they will end up surfacing some of the more in-depth concepts. Last bit, user experience expectations may help color the concepts that we identified and how they will be perceived and manipulated by end users. So it gives us more context about the concepts, about the meaning, their meaning, and about how they are going to be used by our applications, by our users. Now, during the disclose process, it's important we gain some level of business knowledge to ensure that we make better decisions later. So this entire process is meant to not only identify the business concepts, but also kind of teach us a bit more about the business that we are trying to help build solutions for. Okay, so the outcome of this is going to be a cloud of concepts that help us build a solution architecture. Okay, in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page regarding the concepts and their meaning and what their purpose, we will make sure to categorize, detail them a little bit as well, and document this as well. So it's kind of going to be two deliverables, if you will. One will be a list of the concepts with details, and another one that should be a little bit more high level will be just the names of the concepts in a cloud kind of thing. Okay, and I'm already emphasizing, it's actually it's not too obvious here, but business, persona, roles, integration are all emphasized on this slide. It's very hard to tell, but they are. And that's because we are going to use these as some of the categories to kind of break down our concepts. So as an example of a potential outcome for the disclose phase, we could have a detailed list that gives all the concepts, describes what type of concepts, and also explains the concept, okay? This means that everyone involved in the design and the development process has a clear understanding of what each concept means or stands for, okay? Some of the concepts may be easier to grasp, like claims or quotes, which are simply business concepts, or like customer, which can be a business concept, but can also be a persona or a role, okay? So these we need to identify, to categorize in multiple categories if needed. Others may require further detailing, like the integration needs typically require more description, more detail. So for instance, here, Guidewire, I had to check it. The Guidewire provides services that are commonly needed by insurance companies, like claims and policy management. And it may have its own specific requirements in terms of how we integrate with it. So these we need to identify at this stage so that we can move on to the next steps already with a good understanding of the concept itself. Now, of course, this could be a very long list, especially if we have meaningful descriptions here. So as we kind of want to discuss the concepts, we don't want to show all this detail. So typically what we will have as the usable outcome for the disclose phase is going to be something like this. So a cloud, a visual cloud of concepts, no specific order or grouping at this point, that is complete with all the concepts from our example. And if you want to know a bit more detail about them, for instance, if you don't understand what KYC means, we would go to the detailed list and would understand it better. Okay, so in this case, know your customer. That's an important aspect of insurance, the policy or the way we work with insurance. Now, this cloud of words plus the detailed list can be seen as the deliverables of the discovery step, and they will be the disclose step. Sorry, not the discover. Discover is an application, and I always confuse them. So the disclose step, and they will be the starting point for the next step in our architecture design process, which is the organized step. So let's move on to the organized step, where we will focus on identifying what we will call bounded contexts. Think of these as clustering together concepts according to their dependencies, but also other aspects like domain expert boundaries, for instance. The idea is that these bounded contexts should have cohesion of the business concepts that they hold, but also a clear business ownership, and to that extent, analyzing the existing business processes and how data flows will provide greater details about the stakeholders that are involved in the processes. And because architecture is all about clearly communicating the organization of our solution, how we are going to break down the different parts of the solution, making sure that we use language that everyone involved can understand is important so that we can guarantee alignment. Everyone is on the same page, okay? So we shouldn't use names that reflect the business nature of the bounded context. And we'll see examples in the next slides of some of these potential bounded contexts and their names. So don't stress if you don't get it all right the first time around. Just like with Outsystems 11 and with a lot of other agile approaches, it may take a few cycles, a few round trips between disclose and organize to identify the right bounded contexts. And as always, even if we identified the right bounded contexts, well, down the road that new requirements emerge, requirements change, and our architecture is a living entity. So we will need to revisit this later on and adjust accordingly. Okay. Now, by applying the guidelines on the previous slide to group our cloud of concepts, we will end up with several groups like the ones that we are showing here. Okay. These are not necessarily the only option, but understanding the business, these would be a valid approach. We have concepts like payment, ledger, and guidewire in the billing grouping because they're all related. But we also have cases like the home insurance concept, which doesn't really match any other concept. And so we put it in its own bounded context. So we can group multiple concepts into one bounded context or have a bounded context with one concept inside. Okay. And notice that we also clearly identified the integrations with external systems, because this will come in handy later when we want to assemble these contexts into applications and libraries. Integrations tend to become libraries, and you'll see that in a moment. At this point, we have our bounded contexts well identified. But again, we can always reiterate the process if new knowledge surfaces. Okay, the red arrows here are because there may be dependencies between concepts, right? And that will mean that there may be dependencies between bounded contexts. These will be useful in order to determine later if we should group them together in applications or if we should keep them apart, or what the consequence of doing either of those. And we are ready to map the bounded context that we identified into ODC applications and libraries. This is the final stage, the final step. Here we will want to promote independence between development teams, autonomy in the release cycles, all while we try to establish clear ownership of these applications and libraries. Some important guidelines that help us achieve this are shared here, and we're going to detail them individually in the next few slides. So the first one, the way development teams, business owners, and business sponsors are organized will be of the utmost importance. As in, this is essential for us to be able to do our job of determining how should we organize our architecture. Knowing this structure will help us establish clear ownership of the context that we are going to be manipulating. And different contexts may also have different release cycles. And it's important to have a clear notion of these different aspects so that we can assemble contexts with similar release cycles and promote release cycle independence between different development teams. Finally, make sure that you start with a low complexity solution, as typically it will help you lower the cognitive loads that you need in order to understand the problem. So it becomes easy. Okay. It doesn't mean that it will remain a low complexity solution forever, especially if you're growing your factory. But if you have one owner, one sponsor, one team, why break apart an application unless you already have expectations that in the future this will be more kind of distributed. So let's go into a bit more detail on how you can use your understanding of the organization to follow the guidelines, like establishing clear ownership and releasing release cycle independence and reducing complexity. And the first one is regarding establishing clear business ownership. Most simple scenario is where a business owner owns a single app. However, and this is a good one, as it is easy, it works. However, a business owner may also end up owning multiple or maybe even all the apps on your factory. This is also fine, since there is still clear ownership. Each application only has one single owner, right? Now, it gets trickier when you have two owners for the same application. as the example here with the claims and billing application, because it would lead to unclear responsibility and accountability. Okay. So this would lead to ineffective execution and introduce risks and potential collisions or conflicts, conflicting priorities caused by work that is being required by different owners. Okay, so we want to avoid this scenario, and the way to avoid this scenario is, while we are assembling bounded contexts, we want to keep the business owners in mind. So a good approach to group together bounded contexts into applications is based on the business owners, since they are the go-to person for each business context. And this leads us to our last scenario, which is where the claims and billing applications are split apart. So we have two different applications. And now, and now each business owner has its own application, and this may lead to apps depending on each other, as in they work together, so there might have been a strong dependency there, or stronger dependency. Now that we put them apart, there might be a bit more communication between the apps, but now they can evolve independently. And with clear accountability, we know why decisions were made this way or why things are being done this way. There's a business owner responsible for that. Now, the other side of ownership has to do with the product teams responsible for the apps being developed. And let me start by apologizing. So these slides are a reshuffle of slides that are on the training materials. I reshuffled them, I reorganized them, I changed what I say about them, but some of the icons haven't been fully adapted. So we haven't mentioned business sponsors. They already show up here. And in the next slide, there won't be the product team there. So bear with me on that. We missed a few spots here where we need to fix things. But if we have only one team, one owner, and one sponsor, we should start with a simple approach using one application that implements all our bonded contexts. Okay? So it's a typical scenario. One team per application, if we only have one application. It's fine. A team may also be responsible for multiple applications if it doesn't negatively impact the development, if it doesn't negatively impact the development quality or the speed of development. It's critical to find the right balance, though, as too much code can cause excessive cognitive load. So if one single team is dealing with too many applications, that can become a burden. However, two teams should not share ownership of the same application. So similar to the owners, to the business owners, if we introduce more teams and we will start to see an impact on independency or a lack of clear ownership, we should move to a more distributed approach, okay? Because then we have two teams working on the same code, and it's going to be a lot trickier to identify who did what, why. So this is a bad approach. In this case, what should we do? Well, the applications should be split so that only a single team is responsible for each application. So this is a similar approach that we did for the business owners. Makes sense. Keep in mind that it could be that one team still owns multiple applications, is responsible for multiple applications. That's not a problem. That was our previous scenario, the second one there. Okay, so don't have one application being managed or being developed by more than one team. Make sure that each team is fully responsible for the development of applications. But one team can be responsible for more than one application. So what about the release cycle of our applications? So what about our sponsors for purposes? Business sponsors also play a key role here, as they are usually accountable for the budget. So they will have the power to prioritize on demand. They are the ones that say you should do this next because that's what we want, what we need. Okay, and this may lead to different sponsors requiring different delivery paces. And that is why it's so important to match our architecture to the organizational structure. Not mixing business sponsors will end up benefiting the lifecycle independence. So a scenario with one sponsor, one business owner, and one app is as simple as it gets. Okay, so simple scenario. It's also acceptable if we have two sponsors and only one business owner and potentially a product team, as long as each sponsor matches its own application. So what we're saying here is that there's a business owner for both those applications, and there are separate business sponsors, one for each of the applications. This is perfectly valid. Okay, no issues here. So that would allow us to cope with the different pace of change in each application. Okay. Now, when we have multiple business sponsors for the same application with one or more business owners and/or teams, things may get trickier, right? So if the sponsors start requesting changes at the same time, we can easily end up with conflicting priorities that will have an impact on the release cycle of our applications, right? And we'll have to decide who has more authority, okay? So as the best practice, we should always avoid this scenario. And, well, the correct approach in such situations would be to split the applications in two, with each app having its own business sponsor. And by following this best practice, it will be easy to ensure our development teams have independent release cycles. It also enables us to make the most out of ODC and scale it to many teams working on large portfolios of applications and libraries. Now we've mentioned reducing complexity. That was the last guideline there. And I've already kind of hinted at a simple approach and a distributed approach to applications. As we saw, complexity can be directly tied to the organizational structure that we have in place. And it's essential to understand the organization when we want to choose the best architecture approach that can provide us clear ownership, release cycle independence, and ensure that teams are independent and autonomous. In the end, if you have a simple scenario, don't overcomplicate it. So if we have one sponsor, one owner, one team, have it one application that has all the business context. This will mean low development effort. This will mean low architecture effort as well. But it's not always the case. We cannot always have this scenario. So we should have a clear motivation to split our architecture into multiple apps. And this should be well tied with the organizational roles and best practices. Okay. So as an alternative to the simplified approach when we are at the start of our journey with ODC, as we move forward and start having multiple teams, start splitting into multiple applications, following the guidelines that we've just been discussing here about ownership, about the lifecycle. So this approach will promote independence among teams. If we have two or more sponsors, two or more owners, or two or more teams, then we are in a situation where we might want to break apart applications and make sure that they align with the guidelines that we have. So this approach promotes independence among teams while clearly defining app ownership. This may lead to more development effort, but that is balanced with the gains we have with team independence, because we will greatly reduce the overheads that are generated when teams need to coordinate work on the same assets. And this leads us to the final deliverable of the architecture design process, which is the actual application library organization of our bounded contexts. Okay. Oops, I forgot this animation. It's the funny thing with animations. Okay, so now that we understand fundamental best practices, we can pick up where we left off at the end of the organization step, or the organized step, where we had identified our bounded context. And we'll do this in two parts. The first is we will map our business owners and sponsors to our bounded contexts. So we'll look at the bounded context and see who are the business owners and the sponsors for those bounded contexts. This is information that we've gathered through interviews with stakeholders during or before the disclose phase. Okay, this mapping will help us understand better how to combine our bounded context into applications without breaking our goals of having our clear ownership, team independence. And this way, we ensure a good development flow and the release cycle for our applications. Now, based on this mapping that we have here, we can now identify apps and libraries that are needed. Okay. So now we can easily understand how to assemble our architecture and break it down into actual ODC applications and libraries. Goal here is always to ensure the right balance between cohesion and loose coupling. And this will also help us reduce development effort and architecture complexity. Notice how we created applications around one or more bounded contexts. And for the bounded contexts that had integrations, we separated those integrations into libraries. Okay, this is a common practice, at least when it's possible. You should do it because libraries afterwards, instead of being part, so unlike in Outsystems 11, where our modules are each deployed independently in our applications, right? Here in ODC, when we deploy, we only deploy applications. So only applications are going to be accessible to our end users. And libraries are going to be packaged together with the applications themselves, right? So if multiple applications make use of the SAP connector, then that library's binaries will be part of the binary or the container for the application that uses them. So they will be in multiple applications, okay? So extracting this means that it's easier to maintain your libraries, okay? And I'm done. This is the last slide of the presentation. This is the outcome of the architecture design process. We have our applications, we have our libraries, we have inside those the concepts that we are using, and we have knowledge about these concepts because we have that detailed list of concepts that describes the meaning of these. We separated them using some guidelines regarding ownership and release cycle. So we have our business owners, our business sponsors well identified and guaranteed to have clear ownership. And this means that moving forward, we can develop at best speed and best capability. That's it from my end.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Stuart. I think we now have a Kahoot. Do we have any Q&A first? Like I saw someone putting their hands up. So good?
I've got a question for you, Jorge.
Me too. Go on.
Well, Amal, I think Amal was first, so go on.
Thanks, Stuart. So, George, when we build these independent applications, I mean, anything on the transaction management, because you can't have entities in libraries. And when you build independent applications, and it is not feasible to club all of them in one application. Because what we have seen is, I mean, the bigger the application, the slower the publishers, and it's a little bit of a suboptimal when you build really monolithic, modular monoliths. So when we have two applications having entities split across different applications, and you want to have a transaction, any best practices there?
So applications, you're right. So as you grow an application, it becomes slower to publish, of course. So the entities are shared across all applications in the sense that you can make them public and consume them in other applications. So you can access them directly. That is not the best practice. The best practice usually is to rely on service actions to manipulate your entities and allow the aggregates, the use aggregates to read entities if you don't have constraints on the read access, and make sure that the original application is the only one that manipulates them. Okay, because that's what's only the application that defines the entities will be able to manipulate its state. Okay, so that would be the approach. If you have a very big application, then one approach is you break it down along the lines of some bounded context. Okay, so you look at the original bounded context and you break it apart so that you have smaller sized applications with those bounded contexts, and you communicate using service actions and direct access to the entities as we know. That would be the approach that currently is recommended.
Okay. Anything on the transaction part, because these service actions are running in a different kind of process.
Do you want the honest answer or the politically correct answer?
Yeah, I mean, honest.
There's a difference. The honest and the politically correct answer in this case are the same. So it's you have to manage them by yourself. As soon as you start breaking apart things, you need to worry about making sure that your actions, your applications have compensation actions, service actions for the moments where you need to roll back something that didn't go right, and you will need to do that transaction management. The idea that I would suggest is that you keep this transaction management. Every time you do this, you make sure that the application that does transaction management is going to be used in the next chain. So if you break apart an application into two, you make sure that you build the transaction management. It has to be on one of the sides, right? And that can compound. So you don't have to deal with the full transaction. You can just deal with the extra bits of decoupling that you added. But yes, you will have to manage transactions. There's no way around it at this point. That's a distributed service, microservice approach.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So when you're identifying concepts, so let's say you have a customer concept. Would you sometimes, if you identify different types of customer, like a really big customer and a really small customer or something, would you sometimes break them into a separate concept, or would you keep them into the same concept?
I'm not sure. So if it's a matter of categorization, I would put the categorization as a separate concept. I have the customer and I have the type of customer, for instance.
Yeah, okay.
That would be my approach. And that would be my approach even in Outsystems 11, I would say. If it's different intentions for the concepts, then I would call them something different. So if you want the basic structure of a customer, that would be your customer, for instance. And if you want a lot more info, it could be a customer detail, or it could be a prospect, for instance, if you want to keep other information about the customer that is going to be a customer, not yet. So I would say that if it's a matter of clarifying what type of customer, that would be an extra static entities, that sort of thing. If it's more of we call two things customers, but they are not exactly the same, then I would give them different names, and I would keep both.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think Teresa has a question in the chat. If, for example, you migrate from O11, the modules you are presenting, in case of claims, you will merge all modules to one application in ODC?
So first of all, I think the migration process is still EAP, so it's still not accessible to everyone. And it currently only supports very simple migrations under 200 AOs, if I'm not mistaken. So it's small applications. And the current status is that this migration will bundle together all modules of one application in O11. They will be one module, one application in ODC. Okay, so if you want to break apart, for instance, between ODC applications and libraries, the way you would do that is first in O11 you would separate the part that is we want to be a library in a separate application, and then when the migration kit works, it will create an application and a library for that. So yes, the migration process, by default, all modules of an application become part of the same ODC monolith, if you want.
Mhm. Okay, I think we have all the questions answered. Does anyone has a final question before we go?
I have one for Stuart, because I've been looking into the user authentication as well, so I have a question.
Yes.
Is it possible, or do you know if, well, I might be asking futurology, but is it possible to use something like so not OpenID, but the other
Like SAML
SAML.
2 or something?
Yes, SAML 2.0.
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
possible to use currently?
Not out of the box, but that's one of the scenarios that I was talking to some solution architects from Outsystems, and they were saying that they had actually implemented like SAML 2 with a plugin that they built. And I was actually particularly interested in magic link authentication. And they'd done that as well. So not out of the box, but it is possible. And at the moment, you'd have to speak to a solution architect and get pre-access to the code they're using, but they will be building that into a Forge component.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. So if there aren't any other questions, let's start with the Kahoot.
Let's see if everyone paid attention.
Awesome. So for those of you who hasn't played Kahoot, so basically, ideally, you have another device and just scan the code right there, or go to kahoot.it and input that code. So we have 8 questions for this game. You've got, I believe, 20 seconds to put in your answer. The faster the answer and the more correct your answer is, the more points you get. And yeah, so just more of a tradition for us to end a user group event. For top 3 winners will receive some surprises from Outsystems. So yeah, do your best. Let's just wait for a few more.
I love the avatars.
Yeah. Few more seconds. Not Stu. Okay, I believe you. Got Tuan, Naveen, Beaker, Taiwan, Dan, Lachlan, Lindsay, Victor, Amal, Sachin, Matthew, Vazahat, P.I., Felipe, Sagar, Teresa, and Haji. All right, good luck, everyone. I'll start off with the first question. Right, first out of 8 questions. Right, in ODC, how many users can have the same email address? All right, so 14 got it correct. So each user must have a different email address, as Stuart has explained earlier. And one answered multiple users only if they are Jason Statham. Interesting. Let's see who's on top of the board. We've got Matthew, Dan, and Felipe as top 3. And we've got Sagar and Lachlan. Next question. In ODC, which users can be queried from the user's entity? Is it organization users, all end users, some end users, or only beekeepers? And query users. Got 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right, so I think this was a tricky one. 12 answered all end users, and only some end users can be queried. Right, 2-1 jumped to the first place. Question 3, in ODC, access to all users is available via the user's entity, the user management client API, the identity authorization service API, or asking this guy very nicely. Very well. 13 has got it correct. So the user management client API. See the leaderboard. We've got 2-1, Matthew in second place, and we've got PI. Next one. In ODC, what type of grant is used to get a client API access token? Is it authorization code, client credentials, implicit, or lock, stock, and 2 smoking barrels grant?
I've been watching a lot of Netflix, Margaret.
Haven't watched that one, but yeah, still Jason Statham.
Oh, you're missing a treat.
Correct answer is client credentials. Congratulations to those who got the correct answer. Amal is now on top, followed by Matthew, and we've got Victor as well. Next question. Great question, Matthew. So which of the following is not a step of the architecture design process? Is it assemble, discover, organize, or disclose? So it's discover. Amal is still at the top, followed by Victor now and Haji. Next. What is the main goal of the organize step? Identify bounded contexts, identify application concepts, place concepts in the architecture canvas, or keep a tidy workplace. I think this is more of an ODC. All right, we identify bounded context. We've got 12 people getting the correct answer.
OCD?
OCD, ODC, that's the same, right? As long as you organize things. Cool. So we've got Amal still at the top. We've got Haji and Lachlan. Next up, 8 players have reached answer streak 4. Amazing. Right, 7 out of 8 questions. During the assemble step, you should aim to reduce Chris Evans crying. I think that's a clue. Is yellow the correct answer? Yes, someone got the yellow one. Complexity, that's the green one. Reduce complexity during the assemble step. Let's see the board. Lachlan, Haji, and Victor on top 3. We got Tuan and Amal. So we got still a chance. And this is the last question. Everyone ready? Right. Libraries in ODC correspond to modules in O11. Are applications not directly accessible by end users? Provide a public access to books? Or are bundled with each application that uses them? And the correct answer is the green one. All right, so that's our last question. Let's see the winners. Third place, we've got Victor. Congratulations. You got Haji on second place, and the first place is Lachlan. Congratulations. All right, so for all the 3 winners, please email me, margaret@phoenixdx.com, or I will get more information from you just so that we can send the swag items. Ooh. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers. Well done,
Thank you,
Margaret.
Thank you very much.
everyone.
Well done, George.
Thank you for staying. See you next time. Thank you, George. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Patty. Thanks, to
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.